Jan Andrew Henderson is the author of 40 books across various genres, including children's, teen, young adult, and adult fiction and nonfiction, published internationally by notable publishers such as Oxford University Press, Collins, and Harcourt Press. He has been shortlisted for 16 literary awards and has won the Doncaster Book Prize, Aurelius Award, and the Royal Mail Award. In addition to his writing, he runs the Greenlight Literary Editing Service, is a professional member of the Institute of Professional Editors, and mentors through organizations like the Queensland Writers' Centre and the Horror Writers Association. Jan has appeared at numerous writers' festivals, teaches writing courses, and has held various roles, including writing courses, including being a judge for prestigious awards like the Bram Stoker and Robert N. Stevenson Prizes. He is also the founder of Black Heart Entertainment, known for the City of the Dead ghost tours in Edinburgh. Hi, welcome to the channel.
Very, very pleased to be here.
Thank you so much for joining in today.
My pleasure.
Are you ready for the interview?
I am. Ready as I'll ever be, anyway.
You've written over 40 books across various genres. What inspires you to switch between children's, young adult, and adult fiction and nonfiction?
Mainly because I have a short attention span, I think. Most writers, when they start off in one particular genre, they tend to stick to it. But mine's is more out of necessity. I started off writing nonfiction because I saw an opportunity to write a couple of books about historical things that had never been written about before. And then I was contacted by an agent who said, "You write very simply." I still don't know if that was a compliment or not. So maybe you should write children's books. So I started doing that. But then I thought, well, and again, writers don't tend to do this because once you've got a publisher, they like you to stay in your lane and do the thing that you always do. But I was like, no, I want to try different things. So I decided that, that it probably wouldn't be great for my career, but I would write exactly what I wanted to write, the way I wanted to write it. And so I keep jumping around. I've just finished, my latest book is a romance, the first romance I've ever written, and that's just come out. So I like to jump around.
Do you prefer one genre over the other?
Oddly enough, I like writing science fiction, no matter whether it's for kids or for adults, but not science fiction with spaceships and things like that. I like things. I've written about AI before, and suddenly that's like a real thing. That's not science fiction anymore. It's actually here. So I prefer to write about things in the world that are real possibilities, but either haven't happened quite yet the way I'm envisaging them, or can't actually happen the way things do go in the real world. So close to what we really have in the real world, but with a bit of a twist that allows me to do things that you wouldn't do in a normal sort of adventure movie, if you like.
Who is your biggest inspiration?
My biggest inspiration? My father, I think. My father read a lot of that kind of books when he was young, and he would leave them lying around the house. And of course, being Scottish, I was too mean to buy my own books. So I would go out and read whatever he was left lying around. And he was a huge science fiction fan, so I read a lot of his books. And also, like I say, because I grew up in Dundee, in Scotland, and we didn't have very much money, I would go down to the bargain bin in the local store and I would buy whatever was there. And so when I was younger than you, when I was 9 or 10, I was reading things that really weren't suitable for children. And I would read westerns and political things and anything that I got out of the bargain bin. So my education was in books that children don't normally read. And I think that rubbed off on me a bit in wanting to write things that people don't normally read.
Can you name some of the books that you've read or enjoyed reading?
When I was a kid, or my favourite book actually, of all time, is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
Which is a fantastic book, but it's not, and I've never written anything even vaguely like it. Great Gatsby it's a love story. There's not a lot happen. Just one car crash. There's not exactly a lot of adventure. There's no science fiction. There's, I tend to have very, very complex plots. Gatsby doesn't have a complex plot, so which just goes to show you, I think, that you just never know. And that was one of the books I got in the bargain bin, and I would never have read that ever. And I remember reading it when I was about 10 years old and thinking, this is absolutely phenomenal. I couldn't say why. I can say why now, but at the time, I knew it was great. I just didn't know why it was great. So that was a huge effect on me to realise that you could write stories that didn't have to have huge amounts of plot or adventure or things like that to be fantastic.
I've really enjoyed reading Great Gatsby as well.
Yeah, it's a great book, and it's short.
Many of your works have been shortlisted for literary awards, with wins like the Doncaster Book Prize and the Royal Mail Award. How do you feel these accolades have shaped your career?
They give you confidence. I mean, to be a writer, do you write? Do you?
Sometimes.
Well,
Yeah.
there you go. You'll know. To be a writer, you've got to have some self confidence. You've got to be able to say to yourself, "Yes, I could do this." But if you win a prize, then it's like everybody else is saying, "Yeah, okay," and it makes you feel a lot better about yourself and a lot more determined to keep going. It's basically, it's a big confidence boost when you get something like that. However, I am well aware that there are many, many, many fantastic writers who don't get that chance. For instance, there are a lot of self-published writers, and they don't really. I was put forward for awards by my publishing company. If I had been self-publishing a book, for instance, these same bodies that judge it wouldn't have looked at mine. So, although it's fantastic to have that, it does give you confidence. Not getting an award doesn't mean you're not good. It just means you're not getting enough opportunity, I think.
Have these awards also boosted your career?
They helped, yes, they did help. But fortunately, I've never really written to further a career. Strangely enough, I used to write simply because I liked writing. And for instance, when I won the first big award I won was the Royal Mail Award, and that was for a young adult novel. And so, of course, the publisher said, "That's all you can do now. You do young adult novels." So I immediately went out and wrote an adult novel. And they didn't like that, which has never won anything at all. In fact, no one has ever read it. But and part of confidence is that as well. It gives you confidence to say, well, I can actually branch out and try other things as well, whether people want me to or not.
You've also written plays that have been performed in places like Texas and the Edinburgh International Festival. How does your approach differ when writing for this stage versus writing a novel?
Um, it's been the other way around actually, because I started off writing plays. I got a job in a theatre in New York State. Never written a play before that, and so I was there for 5 seasons writing plays for children. And of course, it's completely different from writing books in that it's all dialogue. It's just people talking to each other and a bit of action. So there's no sort of huge descriptions. You can't put descriptions into a play. You can't put how people feel. You only how they act on stage to go on to judge what kind of person they are by what they say. So it's very, very different from writing a book. But when I started writing books, I kept that kind of ethos when I was writing, and I like complex plots, I do, but I try and keep the actual book itself as simple as possible. I don't describe things to a huge extent, and I don't tell the reader what the character is thinking or feeling. Just like in real life and like in a play, you have got to decide for yourself what this character is like simply by what he says and does. And bearing in mind he might be lying when he says stuff as well. So, and that's the way I like to write, and that's been very much informed by starting off writing plays, I think.
Do you think plays hold more emotional weight than novels?
I think that they can do, yes, because like I say, I think a play is much more like real life than a novel is, because you are just watching two people up on a stage doing stuff and saying things just like you would in real life. You can't see into someone else's head to know what they're really thinking. So when a play is powerful, if it's a bad play, no, like all mine's. But if it's a good play and it's very, very powerful, then I think it's just astonishing what you can achieve with just people standing talking to each other. I went to see a play once called Copenhagen, which is about the atomic bomb project in America and Germany during World War II. And it's just people, and nothing really happens. They're just all standing talking to each other. But the effect at the end, I was in tears, and that was fantastic and incredibly complex as well. So I love plays. That wasn't the way I ended up going.
Absolutely. Your books have been published across the UK, USA, Australia, and beyond. How do different audiences respond to your stories, and do you tailor your writing to cultural differences?
Um, I don't. I have been told to once or twice, and you're calling from the States, so you'll like this. I wrote a book called Bunker 10, and in Bunker 10 was a character who, it's what you call in Scotland, it was set in Scotland, and it's what you call a NED. A NED stands for non-educated delinquent. And they all have a uniform. They all wear white tracksuits and Burberry hats. And they all talk like that, you know what I mean? And they are just sort of basically thugs. sorry, Neds. But they are. And they're proud of it. So one of the characters was a Ned, a likeable Ned, but he was a Ned. And of course, then it was published in America. And the American publisher said to me, no one in America is going to understand anything about this guy or anything he says, you know, because he talks in a very broad Scottish slang. Yeah, you have to do something. All right. Okay. And so I used to live in America, so I made him a black rapper. And I'm a middle-aged white man. What do I know about black rapper? But I happen to know a few. So I sat with a website of different gangster slang, like 2 or 3 websites, and I painstakingly translated everything into what I thought was gangsta speak. And then I gave it to these 2 kids that I knew, and they were like, yeah, all right, that's not too bad. Yeah, okay. And so I kept it in. But as far as culture goes, it's a difficult question because, as I say, as a middle-aged white man, I can't put myself in the place of, well, anyone else. And yet I want to experiment when I write. And so I do. I find myself writing stuff of which I'm not really qualified to write about. One of my books is the main character is in a wheelchair. I don't know what that's like. And there are people who say, well, you can't write that character because you don't have experience of what he would be going through. The best I could do was, again, I wrote it and I contacted people who were wheelchair users and said, okay, what do you think? And I got the thumbs up from them as well. And I went ahead. So it's a thorny issue to the cultural one. But I tend to think that what I do is not culture appropriation. It's more cultural appreciation. You know, I like other cultures. I want to experience them. I want to write about them. So I'll give it a go. And then once I've done that, I will ask people from that culture or from that situation, is this accurate enough? And if they say no, then I don't publish it.
So when you're writing, do you write for a particular audience in mind?
Yeah, me. That's it. I don't really. I don't treat children and adults as different when I write. My adult books and my children's books are exactly the same, except there's no swearing in the children's books. That's about it. But I don't believe in talking down to kids. They can take complex plots and they can take difficult ideas and controversial subject matter. They can deal with all that. As long as you put in a bit of humour, that's all I care about. So I don't tend to, no. I don't tend to write for any particular audience. I come up with the story, and if the story grabs me, that's what I'm going to write about.
I like your unique approach. You run the Green Light Literary Editing Service and mentor writers through the Queensland Writers Centre. What are some of the most common mistakes you see from aspiring authors, and how can they improve?
Oh, there really are sort of mistakes that everybody makes. And it's not just beginning writers, it's everybody, including myself. I'll give you three. I think the 3 main ones that everybody does. One is repeat themselves. I'll repeat that. Repeat themselves. They will use the same words over and over again. They'll use the same phrases over and over again, and they'll use the same actions. A person will be doing something and he'll run his hand through his hair, and then he runs his hand through his hair on the next page and the next page, and it's like, stop running your hand through your hair, I know what you're doing. And so repetition, I think, is something that just always, so much of it. And the other one is giving too much information, in that, you get on your bike and you're going to go, and you cycle down into town, and some people they'll describe everything on the route. The guy gets the bike and he pushes the bike and he opens the gate and he shuts the gate. He gets on the bike and he puts his leg over and he starts pedaling. I know, just get on your bike and get into town and keep on with the action. You don't need lots and lots of purple prose. You don't need lots and lots and lots of description of what's around. And you really don't need a blow-by-blow account of how you get on a bike and cycle it somewhere and then get back off again. Just cut to the chase. That's what I think is best. Concentrate on the things that people do want to know about, which is what the character is like. And the third one, and this is just me, this is not for everybody, but just for me, and it goes back to what I said about playwriting. A lot of beginning writers especially, they want to tell you what the character thinks and feels all the time. And I think that really slows a book down. And also, again, it's a bit condescending. I think that, as in real life, have the characters say and do things, and have your reader work out what the character's like from what they say and do. You don't have to tell them that, And if someone's running away from a bear, you don't have to say that they're terrified. They're running away from a bear. You know they're terrified because they're running away from a bear. So just, keep less emotion. That's sort of always been my advice when writing a book. Don't spell everything. It's like the old show, don't tell. Don't spell everything out for your reader. Let them work out things for themselves. Just tell them what's going on.
These are some great pieces of advice.
Well, thank you.
As a judge for the Bram Stoker Awards and the Robert N. Stevenson Prize, what makes a story truly stand out in your eyes?
Those are both horror prizes. And when people write horror, they get really serious about it. I don't know why. And I think that no matter how serious or horrible or scary a story is, there's always room to put in a bit of humour. And I don't think there's not nearly enough of that in the writing that I read. And people, even in the serious situations, people will say things that are funny. Even when their lives are in danger, folk can't resist a good line. If someone says something to me, and it doesn't matter how inappropriate, if I think it's going to be funny, I'll say something about it. And people do use humour in real life, in stressful situations, and to alleviate sort of darkness. And I don't think there's nearly enough of that in short stories. When I'm judging as well, I will forgive a plot that's not particularly original, as long as it's really well written. If it's the other way around, if you've got a phenomenal plot but it's badly written, I'm still not going to give it a good mark, because you got to get the basics right first, I think, before you go and tackle weighty themes and difficult concepts.
So how do you balance writing horror fiction with running real life ghost tours? Do your experiences from the tours ever influence your writing?
They didn't for years and years and years. They were completely separate things. I started writing at the same time as I started running ghost tours. And they never connected in my head. I didn't write horror, and wasn't really interested in writing horror. Science fiction was as close as I got to the fantastical. And it was only... I did write one book. My tours explore a thing called the Mackenzie Poltergeist. And if you look up the Mackenzie Poltergeist, it has now become the best documented supernatural case of all time. Well, so I did write one, but it was a non-fiction book about it. And that was a long time ago. And then I went back to writing fiction. And no, I didn't really bother with horror. And it wasn't until just a few years ago, one of my ghost tour guides said, "You're really missing an opportunity here. You have a ghost tour company. It's big, it's successful, and you've got hundreds of people on your website looking at. Far more people go on my ghost tour website than go on my writing website. That's for sure. you got to write something about it. So I wrote a book called Father Figure, which is actually about, it's fictional. It's about a tour company who has a poltergeist, and things gradually begin to go worse and worse and worse for them, and it all turns into a big mess. So I wrote that. And my new book, the one that I'm writing right now, is a book of children's horror stories. So it's always been there, the presence of my ghost tours, and the fact that, and I'm all, people are like, that's the guy with the creepy stuff, and he loves horror. And my children, they're like, oh, you love horror, don't you? And I'm like, no, not really. You're like, you're always watching horror films. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm always working on my computer, and there's a horror film in the background because all horror films are exactly the same, and therefore I don't have to pay any attention to it. And also it gives me a bit of inspiration because, I do run the ghost tour company and I write the scripts. But horror's never really been a huge part of my life. The ghost stories that I'm writing right now for children are actually for my children, because they kept coming and bugging me and saying, "Yeah, you love horror. Why don't you write us horror stories?" So I'm writing a book of horror stories for children, and what I'm trying to do is I test it out with my kids, and if I read it to them and they go, "Nah, that's lame," then I don't put it in the book. And if I read it to them and they're like, "Ooh," and the last one I read to them, my 9-year-old daughter said, "I am going to be traumatized for the rest of my life." And my son, who's 10, said, "Hell no." And it's like, "Really? Is that your reaction?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Okay." And that became the name of the book. It's called Hell No, because it seemed to fit perfectly.
So what made you start Blackheart Entertainment in the first place?
I used to drift from job to job. I sort of travelled all over the world. I would just do whatever job came along. And one of those, I was in Edinburgh, and I was sitting in a pub, and these two guys were talking next to me, and they'd started a ghost tour company, and they were doing ghost tours, and one of them was saying to the other, we need to find some more people. This is taking off. And I was like, "I'll do that. I can do that." I had no idea whether I could do it or not, but I'll give it a go. So they hired me, and I started doing ghost tours for them. But I thought, this isn't actually very difficult. I could probably do this myself. And I wandered into a place called Greyfriars Graveyard, and was sitting there, and I got talking to the beadle. The beadle is like a caretaker for the church. And he said, "Do you know that this place is haunted?" I said, "No." He's like, "Yeah, there's a thing called the Mackenzie ghost. And there's a locked part of the cemetery, and it's in there." I was like, "Ooh." So I thought, that's it. And I went to Edinburgh Council and I said, "You've got a locked part of your cemetery. Could I have the key?" And they were like, "No." And I was like, "I'll give you money." And of course, it's Scotland. So they were like, "Okay." And they gave me the key. And so I opened up the Covenanters prison. It's just this part of the graveyard that's always locked. And I started taking people in there and telling about this Mackenzie ghost, which we then changed the name into the Mackenzie Poltergeist. And that was it. And I thought that would just be another part-time gig for me, and that was 20 years ago. And the tours are still going strong. They're now the biggest ghost tours in the country, and the Mackenzie Poltergeist is the biggest, the best known documented case of all time. So it's done me very well, but I really do try and keep it separate from my my writing. It's two different lives, if you like. Plus, I live in Australia now, anyway, and the tours are still going in Edinburgh. So I really don't have, I've got a manager and I don't have much to do with them anymore, which is a good job because odd things did happen on the tours. Probably the strangest one, as you were asking, probably the strangest thing that happened was when I did write the book about the Mackenzie Poltergeist, Father Figure, finished it, and as soon as I finished it, put it down, went out, came back, and my house burnt to the ground while I was out. And nothing else was touched, only my house. My house was surrounded by other houses below, on either side, and above, and they were all completely untouched. But my house was absolutely destroyed, and the fire department couldn't find any reason for the fire, and they couldn't understand why the fire didn't spread to surrounding buildings. And one of the features of the Mackenzie Poltergeist is it starts fires. There's been about 12 or 13 fires in the immediate area of the Covenanters prison where it lives. So that was weird. That was weird. Yeah.
Do you think it has something to do with your book?
That's what we're telling people. But I'm sure it was a coincidence, but it was very strange that right after, like it was the day after I finished it, the whole thing goes up in flames. And a lot of the tour guides have reported things happening, and I think we get people to write to us if something happens to them on the tours. Usually they get knocked down or punched or scratched or cut or burnt. And I think we now have 350 pages of eyewitness accounts. That's thousands of people. That's the ones that do write to us. We're not counting the ones that don't. And that's why it's the best documented case of all time. Whether it's real or not, I'm not even going to venture to say, but certainly spectacular.
Wow. What makes Edinburgh such a hotspot for ghost stories and supernatural encounters?
I think there's two reasons. One is because it still looks the same as it did. A lot of it's been rebuilt, but they rebuilt it very well. They rebuilt it to look like it did in the old days. So you add that to the fact that it's always dark and rainy in Edinburgh. So you've got a dark, rainy atmosphere where all the buildings are really old. There are lots and lots of tiny little dark alleyways that you don't know where they go. And that really adds to the atmosphere that makes you think, yes, this could be. It's got very, very violent history as well, Edinburgh, really medieval style history. So that all contributes to the idea that it's haunted. And I think the other reason is because Edinburgh wants it. It's very good for tourists. They love to come and see all the spooky stuff. And Edinburgh's a very much a tourist town, and the people of Edinburgh are not stupid. They're like, yeah, we'll keep this whole ghost thing going. That's bringing in money. So I think one of the other reasons that Edinburgh has a haunted reputation is because it wants one, and it definitely pushes it. So,
Have you ever found like similar spots in Australia?
no, it's 35 degrees out here just now. You can't do a ghost. I thought about it when I got here. I was like, I could start a ghost tour here. But if you take people out in bright sunshine in modern buildings, it just doesn't have that. I do history tours here. And I take people around and tell them history. It's just not the right atmosphere for ghost tours. And I live in Brisbane, and Brisbane was founded. I mean, there were Aboriginals here before that, but Brisbane was founded, the actual city, in 1824. And the house I was living in Edinburgh when I moved here was built 200 years before Brisbane. So Brisbane just doesn't, it's too modern, it's too bright, it's too sunny. You just can't get the atmosphere here for a ghost tour.
Right. You've worn many hats: editor, writer, judge, mentor, and ambassador for Australia Reads. If you had to pick one role that defines you the most, which would it be and why?
I actually asked my daughter this question, my 9-year-old daughter, and she said, "You're my dad. That's your job." Okay, that's fair enough. Up until recently, I would definitely say writer, because that's what I always wanted to do ever since I was a kid. Strangely enough, after 40 books, I've got thousands of ideas still to go, but after 40 books, I've started to go, maybe I should try something different. So I'm taking up painting. I've painted my whole life, but I've never shown anybody them. But I thought, now I'm going to seriously give it a try. So I guess writer up until this point, and then from now on, painter. Even though I've got nothing to show for it whatsoever. But you define yourself the way you want to be defined, I suppose. And I don't want to be defined by my job, just by who I am. So I'll go for dad as well. That's good.
Do you resonate with any styles of famous writers?
No, I try not to. I actually, and this is terrible, and I shouldn't admit this, but I will. I don't actually read very much. I used to when I was a kid. I read vociferously, but over the last 20 or 30 years, I'm busy, and because I'm an editor, and this is terrible. Because I'm an editor, I don't enjoy books as much as I used to. I'll read a book, and no matter, basically, if it's not great, then I'll sit going, no, that's a bad use of that. I don't, and there should be a full stop there, and it just spoils it for me. And if it's a fantastic book, I mean a really fantastic book, then I don't like it because I'm like, that's better than I can do. Then I'm jealous. So I tend not to read. So I don't have, my influences are not writers. I'm more influenced by, I do like listening to people talk to each other and thinking, I could use that as a real conversation. I'm not the only person who does that. The famous writer Ian Rankin, he sits in the Oxford bar every night and he listens to people talk to each other and he writes down the conversations. I don't know if that's strictly legal, but that's what he does. So, there's all sorts of ways you can get your inspiration from writing. Mine just doesn't happen to come from other books or other writers.
That's really cool. For aspiring writers listening to this podcast, what's one piece of advice you wish you had received early in your career?
This is going to sound weird, but as far as writing goes, I don't recall a single piece of advice that I ever particularly followed. I'll give you an example, actually. I'll tell you what, here you go. This is going to sound rather strange. But when I used to live in America, I used to have lots of hair. I used to try and get my hair to do this flicky thing. Now, it would never work. And I was seeing this girl called Margaret Baker, and she said to me, why don't you comb your hair forward instead of backwards? I was like, oh, okay. But I've never done that. She's like, well, try it. Mm-hmm. Oh, there's the flicky thing. It works. And she was like, there you go, see? Nothing to do with writing, you would think. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that, to me, there's no such thing as good advice. And there's no such thing as bad advice either. There's just advice. And you can choose to try it. And if it works for you, fantastic. And if it doesn't work for you, abandon it. And sometimes a piece of good advice will work in some, or a piece of advice will work in some situations, but not in others. So I try not to follow anyone's advice, as in, yes, I will do that. If they tell me something, I'll think about it, I'll try it. And even if someone says something like, oh, that's a ridiculous idea, I still go, I'll think about it. I might try it. And to me, but no, sorry, I can't. Apart from the hair thing, very important as well, because for the next 30 years after that, I comb my hair forwards. But I cannot think of a piece of advice that I wish I'd known earlier. I think, if you're an up and coming writer, listen to everything that everybody's got to say to you. But you decide. You decide what's going to work and what's not going to work. It's up to you. It's your book, your imagination, your life.
That's a very unique approach to life. What's next for you? Are there any new projects or stories in the works that you're excited about?
I am excited about my children's short story. They've just been the book itself. As I say, it's called Hell No. How Far Can You Go? And the idea is it starts off very mild, and then the stories get scarier and scarier. And it's about how far can you read before you decide that you're not going to be able to read any more of it. So I'm quite excited about that. It just got long listed for the Hawkeye Prize, which is nice because it's not even properly finished yet. I just sent it in because I thought that might be fun. So that's great. And a few of the stories in it, I've been entering into competitions, and a couple of the stories have won prizes as well. So I'm quite hopeful that this is actually a good children's, and I'm excited about it because I like to give myself a challenge, and writing kids horror is a real challenge because if it's too much, then you're never going to get past the parents anyway. And if it's not scary enough, then they're like, pfft. So like I say, I'm testing it on my own kids, and it's just getting that balance between, once or twice my children have said, no, no, too much. I'm like, okay. And other times they're like, nah, not enough. So I'm excited about this, but as I say, after that, I think I'm going to take a break from writing, which is not something you'll hear writers say very often, and I want to concentrate on doing other things, especially sort of painting and art.
What impact do you hope to leave on readers?
If it can inspire them to do their own stuff, then I just it's a very simple goal. I just want people to read my books and enjoy them. All of my characters, at least one character in each of my books, is me. Sometimes it's the bad guy, actually, but it's always me. And for the people who know me, that's kind of fun as well, because they're like, it's almost my way, and for my kids as well, not that they read my stuff very much, but it's my way of sort of telling them who I actually am. Because despite the fact that I never shut up, I don't actually talk a lot about how I feel about things and what I think about things. That all comes out in my writing. So so twofold. For people who don't know me, I just want them to enjoy my books. People who have met me, I want them to be able to read it and go, oh, okay, maybe that was part of him. That's what he was like, really. It's like a puzzle, if you like. And I quite like that.
Where can readers find your books?
They're all on Amazon. I live in Australia now. Unfortunately, because I moved to Australia not that long ago, my stuff isn't really available in the country where I live. But you can get some of it. You can get in bookstores in Britain and America. But they're all the books are available on Amazon, so you can find them there, either on Kindle versions or hard copies.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining in today. It was so wonderful talking to you.
It was my absolute pleasure, and I wish you luck in all your future podcasts as well.
Thank you, and I wish you luck with your writing career.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.